So, welcome back, everybody, to our latest episode of The Nest. Today, we will spend today's episode previewing the matchup for the New England Patriots against the Pittsburgh Steelers tomorrow at Acrisure Stadium. And kickoff is scheduled for 1 p.m. ET. The Steelers are 1-0. They're coming off of a 23-20 overtime victory over the Cincinnati Bengals last Sunday. The Patriots, of course, are 0-1 following a 20-7 loss to the Miami Dolphins last Sunday in Miami. And joining me for today's preview is Anirban Chakraborty. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. Lots to talk about as always.
Definitely. Yeah. So let's just jump into this right now. So, a couple talking points for today. So, obviously, the big one for the Patriots and just Steelers overall is TJ Watt, the star defensive player for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's out. He's on injured reserve, out for at least 6 weeks or so. So, now the question is who on the Steelers defense, knowing that Watt is out, who on the defense still worries you for the Patriots?
Yeah, I think without TJ Watt, it's more of a question of the whole team as a unit. I kind of see the Steelers as a little more similar to the Patriots defense in that this season we don't really have one maybe huge all-star player, but we still have players who as a unit can work together. So I think first of all, the Steelers pass rush is going to be pretty intense. We all know that they put Joe Burrow under a lot of pressure, which ultimately led to him getting sacked a couple times. And one of his picks actually came from the pass rush, right? I think that was TJ Watt, but like you mentioned, he's going to be out. I guess the big question is how will the pass rush do without him? I still think they're a pretty solid unit. I mean, you could routinely see that there were often four people in the kind of defensive tackles going up against five on the Bengals O line, and they still managed to get to Burrow. So I think that still says that they're going to be like a pretty hard team to beat. And I think that's kind of where I'm at right now with that team. I think we need to be really mindful of their QB pressure because we're going to be again a team that I'd say our O line is a little better than Cincinnati's, but it's still one that caused us a lot of problems against Miami. And I think that's just still going to be a problem even if TJ Watt's out because I say the whole Steelers unit's pretty tight in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the obvious names is Minka Fitzpatrick, the safety. He recorded a pick six last Sunday against the Bengals, and he's also one of the best safeties in the league. Additionally, the Steelers also intercepted Burrow 4 times overall and sacked him 7 times. So it wasn't just TJ Watt who was making an impact for the Steelers defense last weekend. I mean, other names to watch out for: Akilo Witherspoon and Cameron Sutton, both cornerbacks. They both recorded interceptions last Sunday as well. And of course, there's also linebacker Alex Highsmith, who actually had 3 sacks last Sunday against Joe Burrow. So overall, the Steelers have plenty of playmakers on defense overall. But I think Minka Fitzpatrick, especially, is one who's going to worry me. He also played with the Dolphins, so he has familiarity with Belichick's schemes from his time in Miami. So that's going to be what I'm kind of looking out for. But I think the Steelers still have a very good defense overall. Offense, it's a little bit different, but defensively, I think, yeah, the Steelers still have plenty of playmakers who the Patriots need to be wary of. But our next question is on the offensive side of the football now. Which player on the Steelers offense should the Patriots game plan for the most? Who are you thinking?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm still gonna go with Najee Harris on this one. I think against the Patriots, the I think we're gonna put Mitch Trubisky under a lot of pressure as more of a kind of game manager kind of quarterback, and Najee Harris for what it's worth, he had a pretty he did have a pretty relatively quiet game. He only had 23 yards against Cincinnati, but that's also because a lot of the Steelers' positions kind of came from turnovers, and they actually did rely a lot more on passing the ball, but against the New England Patriots, teams in general do like when they have elite running backs, teams like that play as do try to use them more often than not. I mean, we saw last season with Alvin Kamara or or I guess when we played the Cowboys. So I think that's probably going to be who I look out for. I do want to highlight, like you mentioned, Pat Freiermuth. I think he's a pretty underrated tight end in the league. Last season, he definitely had a little less of a chance because at the time he was behind another tight end whose name I'm forgetting right now. but that was his rookie year, and he was actually a huge red zone threat for Big Ben. That was actually where he got most of his yardage. So I would caveat that in the red zone, I'm actually expecting them to look at Pat Fairmouth because he was that kind of player for them last year. He didn't have a touchdown against Cincinnati, but he still had 75 yards, and he's shown a big ability to really break tackles, and he's a big dude. So we got to watch out for him. And in terms of Deontay Johnson, I mean, yeah, he's a really talented receiver, but I mean, I'm not really that worried about that because, we saw last week at the end of the day that we were kind of talking about this. The Patriots defense did a pretty good job on Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And you can say what you want. Like I think Tua had a reasonable game, but even if you think that, but even if you think that the quarterback was a factor, I mean, we're playing a Mitch Trubisky led offense. So I think if we did a pretty good job against some really all star receivers like Waddle and Hill, that we can do a similarly good job against Johnson and Firma. So I'm honestly more worried about players like Najee Harris on the running game. And not just running, I want to add, but also plays where the running back comes out of the backfield and gets short yards. That's actually a large way that they found success against Cincinnati. Um, they often had play actions where a player comes out of the backfield and then he's found, and then Mitch Trubisky finds them, and then they go for another 10, 15 yards. That's going to be, in my opinion, a big factor in this game.
Yeah, I have to agree there. Like, I think Fryermuth is the main person for me to really kind of for Belichick to really look at in this game. I think 5 catches, 75 yards, and I think he's a very underrated tight end, especially being in that offense, which isn't that great. So he doesn't get as many opportunities. But I think he's a very good player overall. And obviously Deontay Johnson, but I would actually probably disagree a bit on Harris being the main focus. I feel like overall a running back in today's game, they just don't impact the game the way it used to probably be done. So I'm actually okay, and I wouldn't be surprised if Belichick lets Harris have a big game, but really focuses on shutting down Deontay Johnson, Fryermuth, even Chase Claypool, George Pickens. I wouldn't be surprised if Belichick really tries to focus on pressuring Trubisky and forcing them to run the football because he probably knows his defense is probably good enough to limit, like, just make sure that Harris isn't the only player beating them. So that's what I'd probably say. I think Fryermuth and Deontay Johnson are the players I would actually be more worried about in this game. But that said, I do agree. I think last weekend was very impressive because against Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, Hill had 8 catches for 94 yards, no touchdowns though. And Waddle had 4 catches for 69 yards and that touchdown on that 4th and 7 play. That was more of a breakdown on defense than anything really kind of overall concerning. So it's not like you got scorched overall by probably one of the better wide receiving duos in the league. I mean, you could argue it's probably like a top 2 or 3 wide receiving duo in today's game. So I thought the defense is actually not too bad. But I don't think Najee Harris is going to be, if the Patriots don't win this game, I don't think it will be because of Najee Harris. It'll be because they weren't able to contain, the secondary wasn't able to contain Johnson or Fryermuth at the end of the day. But
Yeah,
that's
I
sort of
guess
my,
it kind of depends. Yeah, I think I definitely agree that the role of that every down back is we're transitioning away from that in the NFL, and probably for the best of the players because I mean, how many times have we seen an every down running back get injured because of their workload, right? That's kind of what happened to McCaffrey and Derrick Henry. But I do want to say also that the receiving game from running backs is something that I think we need to be careful about. And I know Miami didn't really end up utilizing their running backs as much, but Chase Edmonds did find some joy on the few plays that he was involved in against the Patriots defense last week. And again, that was coming from that passing kind of check down type of play where Tua checked it to Chase Edmonds, and then he was kind of had the blocking ahead of him to make a gain. And just for context, last season, right? Last season, Najee Harris had, in terms of receiving yards, he actually had 467, right? Which is a pretty good amount for a running back, right? Just for context, Jonathan Taylor had 360 yards of receiving. And of course, Jonathan Taylor was just like the best running back in the league last season. But my point is, Najee Harris has demonstrated that as a running back, he's still a really strong receiving threat. So I'm saying like we need to be really careful about the check down because, like you mentioned, I think I don't think Belichick will want them to throw to Deontay Johnson or Pat Firmer precisely because they're so dangerous in the red zone and late gains, right? I mean, Mitch Trubisky targeted Deontay Johnson 12 times last game. I don't think Belichick would want that from an all-pro category wide receiver. So I think that's actually going to make Mitch Trubisky probably have to check down more often than not to get these short kind of gains. And that's why I think Najee Harris is actually going to be more important for their receiving game in that regard as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall it's going to be interesting to sort of see how they game plan for this and how they scheme this out because, but I think this also kind of okay, yeah. So I guess that sort of answered that part. So the next question is, how concerned are you about the offensive line following kind of like a poor showing in Miami because the Steelers sacked Burrow 7 times, so definitely the Steelers pass rush is definitely something to be wary of, right? With Alex Highsmith, who had 3 sacks, they have Devin Bush, Miles Jack. So, are you concerned about the offensive line struggling again against this Pittsburgh pass rush?
Yeah, I am concerned. Um, I think you hit the nail on the head. And like we saw at the beginning of last year, we're having an offensive line that is not really able to protect Mac Jones from from really incoming pressure and QB hits and such. And first of all, Trent Brown is, I believe, a limited participant in practice right now, so he might not. I mean, he's kind of in question for an ankle problem from playing tomorrow. And in that case, I mean, Trent Brown was out for a lot of last year, but that's going to again be another disruption. The second thing is we talked about communication last week about how it didn't seem like the offensive line was on the same page about assignments, not on the offensive line, but also Hunter Henry, right? And as a tight end. So, you know, I there's been a week, so we'd like to think that they've really worked on that and identified that as a problem. But until I see it with my own eyes, I still have to say I'm very worried about similar kind of miscommunications and kind of missed assignments for this week as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think Highsmith definitely is one player to watch out for. 3 sacks, and that's actually very kind of it sort of just shows how versatile this Pittsburgh pass rush is. So it's not just one player. Like obviously Watt is the best player as a linebacker, but he's out. But they still have players like Highsmith, Devin Bush, Miles Jack, as I mentioned. They have contributors across the defense overall. So even without Watt, I expect Pittsburgh to give the Patriots offensive line plenty to handle. And it'll be kind of worthwhile to see how the offensive line kind of adjusts because last week, like there was a basically a missed assignment that caused Mac Jones to be strip sacked and it was returned for a touchdown. So those are the types of plays you can't afford to have, especially when you're an offensive team that's just not that good at this point. So I am concerned about the offensive line again. And that sort of goes into the score prediction. But before we go into that, I guess let's just talk about the Patriots defense a little bit. So the Steelers offense isn't as talented, or it's not even as dynamic as Miami, right? You have Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, but contrast that with what we saw last Sunday with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Chase Edmonds. And Tua is also kind of like Mitch Trubisky, sort of like a game manager at best. So I think overall, like the quarterback talent is kind of similar, but the receiving talent definitely drops off when you compare Miami to Pittsburgh. So I guess the question is, do you feel confident that the defense once again will do its part in limiting the Pittsburgh offense this time?
I think so. I mean, you're talking about the difference in the receiving core. I would say that Deontay Johnson is on par with really the best out there when it comes to receiving. But after that, like you mentioned, there is definitely a difference in quality. Chase Claypool's was pretty promising last year, but we didn't really seem that involved last week. George Pickens is another rookie who got 3 targets last week, and I think there's a lot of expectation on him this season. But historically, right, it does take a few weeks at least for rookie wide receivers to really get into the speed of things with the NFL. So I think the secondary for the Patriots will again focus probably on Deontay Johnson. I would say that we're not going to expect the same defense as what we saw last week because again, I think I mentioned this last week. Tyreek Hill really Tyreek Hill is just so good and he's so fast that you need an entire game plan just for him. And for us, it was to really put Kyle Duggar on him, surround him with 2 or 3 players. I feel like the secondary assignments were really done with Tyreek Hill in mind. So this week, we're probably not going to see that being similar. But I could still say maybe for Deontay Johnson, maybe they'll assign kind of a safety and a cornerback to kind of be in his general area. I can predict a lot of zone defense because maybe the man-to-man coverage, we don't really have the cornerback who can maybe match Deontay Johnson at the moment. But the Cincinnati defense last week actually got 5 hits on Mitch Trubisky, and they only sacked him once, but they were getting to the quarterback. And when you look at how well we did last week, we did sack Tua, I want to say 3 times, or could have been twice. But that was a lot better than last year. We have to keep in mind, right? Last year, how many times did we say that the defense just couldn't put pressure on Tua in the pocket? That's what we saw when we played in the beginning of the season and when we played them near the end of the season. So that was actually a good thing. I would say last week, one highlight was that we could get to the quarterback. So I could predict us causing similar problems for Mitch. But that's actually why I'm telling you again that Mitch is probably going to be in situations where he'll have to make quick check downs because he's not going to have time to really sit in the pocket and pick out the best spot for Pat Freiermuth. And that's again why we have to be really careful about picking up players coming out of the backfield on play action. Because if we're too busy covering Pat Freiermuth, Deontay Johnson, Claypool on the plays, that leaves a big gap in the middle of the field for someone like Najee Harris or I guess Jaylen Warren to really come out of the backfield and cause a lot of damage. So we have a good secondary. We have to be really careful to make sure that we protect the backfield as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess at this point, I'd also like to welcome in Rohan Venkatesh to the show.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah,
wow,
we were
Rohan
just talking
with the brief cameo. Rohan, do you so we were talking about the Steelers offense. So so do you think the defense basically once again will have a solid showing?
I think
For the
so.
Patriots defense, of course.
I think overall last time, I think the Patriots defense did a pretty good job. I mean, allowing 13 points despite the 20 to 7 scoreline because 7 of those points were scored off of the defensive touchdown. Given all of that, I mean, obviously, I think that the Pittsburgh offense, I mean, it can be pretty dynamic, but it's just not the same kind of offense that it was, say, like a few years ago at their heyday when they had Big Ben. I mean, this is going to be kind of one of those unique matchups where it's going to be Patriots and Steelers, and neither team has that big quarterback. Obviously, for Pittsburgh, it's going to be Big Ben. That's not going to be there. And obviously for the Patriots, I mean, it's going to be like a good 2 years since like not having Brady, but yeah, the Pittsburgh offense is not really the same as it was before. And I think that if the defense can just do its job the same way it did last week in terms of limiting those opportunities, both on the rush and on the passing side, I think it does give the Patriots a good enough fighting chance. It's just really going to be up to the offense to really step it up. And that's going to be the key challenge of this game. I personally don't think that for the Patriots that this is going to be a walk in the park, and it's not really going to be. But I do think it's going to be easier than last week. That said, though, yeah, after what we saw last week, this week is going to be a challenge as well. So that's kind of my take on the defense so far.
Yeah, I guess to answer this question, I sort of think that it'll basically have a good showing again against the Steelers. I don't really believe in Trubisky at the quarterback position, and I think he's kind of like Tua. I think Tua might actually be a little bit better than him, actually. So I actually think overall the Steelers, I do think the check down is going to be a thing to watch out for. And actually, Najee Harris last year had 74 catches, which is kind of interesting. So he had quite a few catches. So there could be a lot of those like kind of check down to the running back and the running back at the 10 yards. We've seen that all the time. So I do think the defense will do well, but I think it'll also just be one of those classic low scoring games that we've sort of been.
I do agree with you about low scoring. I do agree with you on that one.
But anyways, the last question now. I guess Rohan joined just in time to give us a prediction. So what is the score prediction for tomorrow? Rohan, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'm going with 13-10. I'm going with the Steelers on this one. I think it's going to be better performance than last week, but I think the struggles from last week are just enough to carry over this team, and I think that this team generally probably doesn't have what it takes to really come after to really come back from the kind of loss that they had last week. I think this Patriots team from a few years ago, I mean, every time they lost, they would come back with a vengeance. Last week was particularly not so good. And I think they're going to put up a better fight this time, but I think they're going to fall again. 13-10. I'm going with the Steelers on this one.
Okay, I'll go quickly. So I have 12-10 Patriots. I don't think the Patriots will score a touchdown. I think they'll get 4 field goals. So I think it'll be one of those types of games. This is really actually a must win for the Patriots, because if they fall to 0-2, next 2 matchups against Baltimore and Green Bay. So, I mean, if they lose tomorrow, there is a real chance they start 0-4. And that's pretty much you can't come back from that. So 1-3 at least, if they win tomorrow and then they lose the next 2, at least you're 1-3. Last year you were 1-3 and you made the playoffs. 2001 they were 1-3 and they ended up winning the Super Bowl. Different teams, but at least 1-3 you can come back from that. 0-4 though, it's over at that point. So for that reason, I have to pick Patriots 12, Steelers 10. I think it's going to be one of those low scoring battles, but I think the Patriots barely come through at the very end.
Yeah, I also think
Pats are slightly favored. if you're curious about that. But anyway, go ahead on your one.
Yeah, I would say I also would favor the Patriots in this matchup. I mean, at this point it's kind of semantics, but I'd say 13-7. I think we can be put in the position for a touchdown, and from the reports, it does seem like Kendrick Bourne is expected to play a bigger role this week. And I mean, the one catch he had last week made him our second highest, or maybe highest receiver. So that kind of tells you how we did last week. But let's also remember, Mac Jones is reportedly feeling a lot better after whatever back problem he had. And I think we were discussing last week, it's really hard to tell if that maybe had some impact on some of his throwing accuracy. So I think we can still pull a touchdown or 2. And at the same time, I'm also not tremendously worried about the Steelers offense. I think our defense is going to match up pretty well with them, and it's just, again, going to be a pretty low scoring game.
Okay, so you heard all of our predictions. So Rohan has the Steelers 13-10. I picked 12-10 Patriots, and Urban has 13-7 Patriots. So okay, so all of us predict a pretty low scoring game tomorrow. But yeah, that'll be it for this week. We'll be, of course, back next weekend to preview the matchup against the Ravens and also discuss the Steelers game tomorrow. But until then, have a great rest of your weekend, everyone.
Peace.
Goodbye, everybody.